June 2006, Stockholm, Sweden. The world's biggest movie studios, major record labels, and government agencies were all united by one mission: shut down a single website. They believed that if they could take it offline today, the largest wave of online piracy in history would finally come to an end. Early that morning, dozens of police officers stormed into a data center. Servers were powered down one by one. Hard drives were ripped out. Network cables were disconnected. Entire server racks were emptied. Within minutes, one of the world's most popular websites had vanished from the internet. Its name was the Pirate Bay, a platform where millions of people could find movies, music, games, and software with just a few clicks. Hollywood blamed it for billions of dollars in lost revenue. The music industry called it the greatest threat it had ever faced, and governments around the world viewed it as one of the biggest challenges to international copyright law. Just hours after the raid, television networks were reporting that the world's most notorious piracy website had finally been eliminated. Movie studios celebrated. Copyright organizations believed they had won their biggest battle. But then, just 3 days later,
something happened that stunned the entire world. The Pirate Bay was back online, running on new servers from a new location and attracting even more traffic than before. Its homepage featured a pirate ship firing cannonballs at the iconic Hollywood sign. This wasn't just a website coming back. It was a message. You can seize servers, but you can't seize an idea. And that raised a question no one could ignore. If the world's biggest corporations, the full power of governments, and international copyright laws still couldn't erase a single website forever, then was the internet ever truly under anyone's control? What had 3 young Swedish programmers built that kept coming back stronger every single time it was taken down? To answer that question, we have to go back to Stockholm, Sweden, 2003.
Stockholm, Sweden, 2003. Inside a small apartment, there was an ordinary bedroom. Computer parts were scattered across the floor. Old monitors leaned against the walls. And beneath a simple bed, a small homemade server hummed around the clock. Sitting in the middle of it all was a 19-year-old programmer named Gottfrid Svartholm. But the internet didn't know him by his real name. Online, he was known simply as Anakata. Long, messy hair, a quiet, mysterious smile, and a mind obsessed with one thing: building an internet where nobody needed permission. To him, the internet wasn't just a collection of websites. It was the greatest platform for freedom ever created. He believed that if information couldn't be stopped, then the people sharing it couldn't be stopped either. That single belief would soon give birth to one of the most controversial experiments in internet history. Together with his 2 friends, Fredrik Neij and Peter Sunde, Gottfrid built a small BitTorrent tracker. There was no company behind it, no investors, no business plan. It was simply an experiment created for an anti-copyright organization called BitTorrent. Their vision was radically different. They imagined a world where digital files belonged to the internet community, not to corporations. No gatekeepers, no permission, no censorship, and most importantly, no user activity would ever be logged. That philosophy would eventually become both their greatest strength and the reason they would be hunted around the world. In the beginning, the entire system ran from a single server inside Gottfrid's bedroom, a modest machine quietly operating beneath his bed. But within months, what had started as a hobby began spreading across the internet at an astonishing pace. By the end of 2004, the project had a new name: the Pirate Bay.
Every day, thousands of new users joined. Some downloaded open-source Linux distributions. Others searched for newly released Hollywood movies, music, software, games. Every torrent, every request, and every connection flowed through that tiny server sitting inside a teenager's bedroom. Traffic exploded so quickly that the home's internet connection could barely keep up. The monthly bills kept climbing. It became obvious this was no longer a bedroom hobby. If the project was going to survive, it needed a professional infrastructure. That decision led to the creation of PRQ, a hosting company unlike any other. Its philosophy was simple. They wouldn't decide what people were allowed to publish. They wouldn't keep user logs, and they wouldn't surrender to legal pressure. While other hosting providers shut down servers after receiving legal complaints, PRQ treated every legal notice like a badge of honor. Their message was unmistakable. If you want to stop us, see you in court. At that moment, the Pirate Bay stopped being just another website. It became the face of a growing conflict between internet freedom and copyright enforcement, and the real battle had only just begun.
2004. Hollywood was done waiting. Lawyers representing DreamWorks Studios sent the Pirate Bay a formal cease and desist letter. Their demand was simple: remove every torrent related to Shrek 2 immediately. Most websites would have backed down the moment they received a legal threat like that. But Gottfrid Svartholm wasn't like most people. The reply he sent would soon become one of the most famous emails in internet history. He wrote, "Sweden is not a state of the United States. To the best of our knowledge, and according to our lawyers, we are not violating any Swedish law." And then, he ended the email by openly mocking the Hollywood lawyers. What shocked people even more was that he didn't keep the exchange private. Instead, he published the entire correspondence on the Pirate Bay's homepage. Within hours, the email spread across the internet. The legal notice that was supposed to intimidate the Pirate Bay became its biggest advertisement. By the very next day, traffic to the website had nearly tripled. From that point on, every lawsuit, every legal threat, and every cease and desist letter only made the Pirate Bay more famous. By the middle of 2005, the Pirate Bay had grown to a level where its traffic rivaled many of the world's largest technology companies. The most astonishing part was that the entire platform was still powered largely by Gottfrid's own code. He had developed a custom BitTorrent tracker called Hypercube. The system could coordinate file sharing between millions of computers around the world, all at the same time. At its peak, nearly 25 million peer connections were connected to the Pirate Bay's network simultaneously. The traffic became so enormous that the site was counted among the top 100 websites on the internet. And yet, when someone visited the homepage for the first time, it looked almost unbelievably simple. A small search bar, a pirate ship logo, and a long list of torrent links. On the surface, there was nothing extraordinary about it. But behind that minimalist interface, Gottfrid was quietly building something that was moving closer and closer to digital immortality. Every new user made the network stronger. Every shared file created another copy somewhere else. It was no longer just a website. It had evolved into a living network, one that became harder to destroy every single day it continued.
May 2006. Hollywood's pressure had reached its breaking point. America's most powerful entertainment companies were demanding only one thing from the Swedish government: shut down the Pirate Bay once and for all. For months, emails were exchanged behind closed doors. Private meetings were held. Political pressure continued to intensify. The Swedish government, which had long taken a relatively hands-off approach to the internet, was now being pushed toward direct action. This was no longer just about a website. It had become an international political issue. Then, on a morning in May 2006, Gottfrid's phone rang. On the other end was a trusted contact from Sweden's telecommunications industry. He delivered only one warning: the police were ready. The raid could happen at any moment. The moment the call ended, Gottfrid immediately contacted Fredrik Neij. But surprisingly, neither of them appeared worried, because they had been preparing for this day for months. Long before the authorities made their move, they had already built a complete disaster recovery plan. The Pirate Bay's entire database had already been stored as encrypted backups on servers in the Netherlands. Even if every server in Sweden were seized, they could rebuild the entire website within just a few hours. Over the previous 2 years, Gottfrid had engineered the platform so efficiently that its entire infrastructure could fit onto a single USB flash drive. Wherever there was electricity and an internet connection, the Pirate Bay could come back to life. Now, only a few hours remained before sunrise. Meanwhile, 53 armed police officers were making their final preparations. They were convinced that this would be the day they finally destroyed the internet's most notorious piracy website. But there was one crucial fact that law enforcement didn't know. The only thing they were about to seize was hardware. The data they were actually looking for had already quietly
made its way to Amsterdam. They believed they were about to capture a fortress, but in reality, by the time they broke through the gates, the entire army had already moved somewhere else. Now the only question was, how long would it take the police to realize they had captured an empty fortress? And when they finally arrested Gottfrid himself, what would his next move be?
May 31st, 2006. 5:47 a.m. The operation had begun. May 31st, 2006. 5:47 a.m. Stockholm had barely begun to wake up when police vehicles quietly moved through different parts of the city without their silence. This wasn't an ordinary raid. It was the beginning of an operation that had been secretly planned for months. The first door was forced open in the district of Bredeng. Inside was the data center of the internet service provider, where the Pirate Bay's primary servers were hosted. Within seconds, armed officers had entered the facility. Every team already knew exactly what it had to do. At the same moment, raids were carried out at 10 different locations across Sweden. Inside the server room, running systems were shut down without warning. Servers were pulled from their metal racks. Hard drives, one by one, were sealed inside evidence bags. The technicians on site stood with their hands raised, watching it all unfold. Within minutes, expensive networking equipment was loaded onto rolling carts and taken away. Meanwhile, Gottfrid Svartholm and Fredrik Neij were arrested. They were taken into separate interrogation rooms, where investigators questioned them individually. By 11 a.m., every major news channel in Sweden was broadcasting the same breaking story. The world's most notorious piracy website has been shut down. Police spokespersons stood before television cameras, claiming they had dismantled a major criminal network. Across internet forums around the world, users anxiously asked one another whether the Pirate Bay was really gone. But on the streets of Stockholm, a very different scene was unfolding. Hundreds of demonstrators, carrying pirate flags, gathered in protest. It looked as though Hollywood had finally won its biggest battle. Anyone trying to open the Pirate Bay was greeted only by error messages. Movie studios, the MPAA, and copyright organizations were congratulating one another. They were convinced that the money they had lost to piracy would finally start coming back. But they had no idea that the real story was only just beginning. June 2nd, 2006. Shortly after midnight, a rumor began spreading across the internet. The Pirate Bay is back. People refreshed their browsers, and then the familiar homepage appeared once again. But this time, there was one important change. The pirate ship logo was shown firing cannonballs at the famous Hollywood hillside sign. This wasn't simply a comeback. It was an open challenge. The police had seized the servers, but they had never touched the things that mattered most: the data, the code, and the network of millions of users. While the raid was taking place,
Gottfrid's team had already migrated the entire platform to servers in Amsterdam. The DNS records were updated, the database was restored, and within just 72 hours, the Pirate Bay returned, stronger than ever. Hollywood had tried to destroy it. Instead, without realizing it, they had made it even more famous around the world.
February 16, 2009. Stockholm District Court. The courtroom was packed with journalists, television cameras, and security officers. This wasn't just the trial of 4 individuals. It was a test of something much bigger. Would the freedom of the internet be forced to surrender to copyright law? At the defense table sat 4 men. Gottfrid Svartholm, wearing the same faint smile,
as if none of this truly concerned him. Beside him, Fredrik Neij sat quietly with his arms folded. Peter Sunde continued posting updates from his phone, even while the proceedings were underway. And the fourth defendant was Carl Lundstrom, the businessman who had financially supported the Pirate Bay during its early years. The media gave the trial a nickname, the Spec Trial, because it wasn't simply a courtroom case. It had become a global spectacle. Prosecutors argued that the four men had deliberately enabled millions of copyright violations while earning substantial advertising revenue from the platform. But the defense presented a completely different argument. They insisted that the Pirate Bay had never stored copyrighted files on its own servers. It merely indexed torrent links. If the actual files existed somewhere else, how could the website itself be held responsible? Outside the courthouse, hundreds of supporters gathered wearing pirate hats. Inside, journalists from nearly 30 countries carefully recorded every word. The trial had gradually evolved from a technical legal dispute into an ideological battle over the future of the internet. Then, one unexpected moment left the entire courtroom laughing. A government prosecutor attempted to explain how BitTorrent technology worked, but he got the technical details completely wrong. From his seat, Gottfrid interrupted and calmly corrected the explanation. For a few seconds, the entire courtroom burst into laughter. Meanwhile, lawyers representing the entertainment industry displayed charts claiming billions of dollars in losses. At the same time, the court received thousands of letters from internet users. Many explained that because of the Pirate Bay, they had been able to access documentaries, books, and rare films that they could never have afforded otherwise. The judge asked whether the website's primary goal had simply been to make money. The defense replied that the site's advertising revenue barely covered the cost of keeping the servers online. Meanwhile, Peter Sunde published daily updates about the trial on his blog. Within days, the case had become a live internet drama, followed by millions
around the world. Then, April 17, 2009, Judgment Day arrived. The courtroom was completely full. The judge delivered the verdict. All four defendants were found guilty. For assisting copyright infringement, each was sentenced to 1 year in prison. In addition, the court ordered them to pay a combined fine of 30 million Swedish kroner. This wasn't just another legal ruling. It was a message to the entire world. Anyone who challenges copyright law on the internet will face the same consequences. But the Pirate Bay refused to back down. Only minutes after the verdict, the website changed its logo. It now featured Mickey Mouse with tape covering his mouth. According to the site's founders, it symbolized censorship supported by major entertainment companies. Speaking to reporters, Peter Sunde insisted that the verdict would change nothing. An appeal was filed immediately, and under Swedish law, no one would go to prison until every appeal had been exhausted. But no one realized that the most mysterious chapter of the story was still waiting to unfold. Because one of the four defendants would soon vanish without a trace.
The verdict had been delivered, but the fight was far from over. All four defendants immediately filed appeals. Under Swedish law, no prison sentence could be enforced until every appeal had been exhausted. So, for the time being, none of them went to prison. But then, in November 2010, the Court of Appeal issued its ruling. The prison sentences for some of the defendants were slightly reduced, but the financial penalties became significantly larger. Together, they were now ordered to pay approximately 46 million Swedish krona, roughly $7 million at the time. For four young men who didn't own a billion-dollar corporation,
it was an almost impossible amount to pay. Peter Sunde wrote on his blog, "You can't squeeze blood from a stone." His message was unmistakable. They had no intention of voluntarily paying a single krona. Then came 2011. Sweden's Supreme Court refused to hear any further appeal. The verdict was now final. The government began preparing to send all 4 men to prison. But when authorities arrived to arrest them, one man was gone. Gottfrid Svartholm. Official records stated that he had failed to appear in court because of illness. But the media was telling a very different story. Reports began circulating that Gottfrid had fled to Cambodia. Meanwhile, Fredrik Neij had also left Sweden, moving to Laos with his wife. Only Peter Sunde eventually turned himself in to the authorities. Before doing so, he continued speaking at hacker conferences around the world. Carl Lundstrom served his relatively short sentence under house arrest. But the central figure of the entire story, Gottfrid, had completely disappeared. Interpol issued a red notice for his arrest. Swedish investigators began coordinating with governments across Southeast Asia. But they were searching for a man who relied on encrypted communications, constantly changed locations, and lived in countries where extradition procedures were highly complicated. Months passed. Occasionally, someone claimed they had spotted him, working quietly on a laptop inside an internet cafe in Phnom Penh. Later, WikiLeaks acknowledged that during its massive 2010 document leaks, Gottfrid had helped build part of its technical infrastructure. His life had become a reflection of the very philosophy behind the Pirate Bay itself.
Beyond borders, and almost impossible to capture. But the website he had created continued evolving, even without him. In 2012, the Pirate Bay introduced a change that made it even harder to shut down. The site largely abandoned traditional torrent files and switched to magnet links. Now, there were virtually no torrent files left for police to seize. The website stored only a small cryptographic hash, a piece of data that was almost as impossible to confiscate as arresting a mathematical equation. The Pirate Bay also released a compact backup of the entire website. Anyone could download it, and within minutes, launch a new Pirate Bay, almost anywhere in the world. It was no longer just a website. It had become a decentralized network, a system that could no longer be destroyed simply by seizing physical servers. But Gottfrid's personal story was about to take an even darker turn. Copyright infringement was no longer his biggest problem, because now both Sweden and Denmark were preparing entirely new criminal charges against him. And this time, the case wasn't about movies. It involved government databases, identity theft, and cyber hacking.
August 30th, 2012. Phnom Penh, Cambodia. After nearly a year and a half of searching across Southeast Asia, Swedish authorities finally found the man they had been hunting for. In a joint operation, Swedish investigators and Cambodian police arrived at a waterfront apartment in the Cambodian capital. The door was forced open. Inside, a 27-year-old man sat leaning over a laptop. The room was filled with empty energy drink cans, scattered takeout containers, and computer equipment
covering nearly every surface. It was Gottfrid Svartholm. This time, he didn't resist. He was arrested without incident. Within just 72 hours, he was placed on a flight back to Stockholm. The man who had managed to evade capture for 16 months was finally returning to serve his 1-year prison sentence in the Pirate Bay case. But the Swedish prosecutors had much bigger plans. They suspected that Gottfrid hadn't merely been hiding. They believed that while he was on the run, he had been breaking into government computer systems. Even before the prison intake process was complete, new criminal charges were filed against him. This time, the case wasn't about copyright. The allegations involved unauthorized access to Swedish government databases and attempted bank fraud. Investigators claimed that between 2010 and 2012, while Gottfrid was a fugitive, computers linked to him had been used to hack the servers of Logica, an IT company that managed systems for Sweden's tax agency. According to prosecutors, the attackers obtained thousands of citizens' tax identification numbers and attempted to create fraudulent driver's licenses. But the most serious accusation was still to come. Investigators alleged that there had also been an attempt to breach the systems of Nordea Bank with the goal of transferring money without authorization. Now, Gottfrid's public image had completely changed. Once, he had been viewed as a rebellious programmer, challenging copyright laws. Now, the government was portraying him as a threat to national cybersecurity. Gottfrid categorically denied every allegation. His defense was just as technical as his life had always been. He claimed that his laptop had itself been compromised by other hackers. According to his account, an unknown attacker had used his computer as a proxy to carry out every intrusion. He told his lawyer, "I was just a puppet." Digital forensic investigators did confirm that malware had been found on his computer. Some cybersecurity experts agreed that it was entirely possible someone else had remotely controlled his system. But the prosecution had an answer ready. They argued that Gottfrid was such an exceptionally skilled programmer that he could have installed the malware himself to later use it as evidence of his own innocence. Now, the trial was no longer just about technology. It had become a battle over one question. Was Gottfrid Svartholm the hacker or the victim of another hacker? 2013. Inside a Stockholm courtroom, the most technically complex trial of Gottfrid Svartholm's life was underway. On one side, prosecutors argued that he was the mastermind behind the government database intrusions. On the other, Gottfrid maintained that someone else had used his computer. For days, digital forensic reports, server logs, malware analysis, and technical evidence were presented before the court. Finally, the court delivered its verdict. The judge acknowledged that Gottfrid's computer had indeed been infected with malware installed by an outside party. But the court also ruled that this alone did not completely absolve him of responsibility for the unauthorized access to government systems. The verdict was clear. Gottfrid was found guilty of hacking Logica's systems and unlawfully accessing confidential government data. However, the court found that there was insufficient evidence to support the allegations involving Nordea Bank. Those charges were dismissed. Gottfrid was sentenced to 2 years in prison. Later, on appeal, the the sentence was reduced to 1 year. But his legal troubles were far from over. As soon as he began serving his sentence in Sweden, another country was already waiting for him: Denmark. Its authorities were investigating one of the country's largest cyber attacks. In 2012, the systems of CSC, one of Denmark's leading IT companies, had been breached. The company managed critical government databases for the Danish police and
Social security systems. During the attack, the personal identification numbers of millions of Danish citizens were stolen. Sensitive police records had also been accessed. It became one of the most serious cybersecurity incidents in Scandinavian history. Investigators followed chat logs, digital activity, and technical evidence until once again they arrived at the same online identity: Anakata, the alias used by Gottfrid Svartholm. By the end of 2013, as soon as he completed his Swedish prison sentence, Denmark requested his extradition. He was transferred directly to Copenhagen. There, he was placed in solitary confinement. October 2014, another major trial began in a Danish courtroom. Prosecutors alleged that over a period of 6 months, the attackers had repeatedly infiltrated CSC's mainframe systems. But Gottfrid's defense presented the same argument once again. They claimed that the individual using the online identity, Anakata, was not Gottfrid at all. His co-defendant even testified that he had personally met the real Anakata, and that it was someone else entirely. It was a bold defense, but the jury was not convinced. Digital forensic evidence, stolen data recovered from Gottfrid's computer, and records of his online activity all pointed in the same direction. October 27, 2014, the verdict was delivered. Gottfrid was found guilty once again. This time, he was sentenced to 3.5 years in prison. At the time, it was one of the harshest hacking sentences ever imposed in Danish history. As the judge read the verdict, Gottfrid showed almost no emotion. 3 years on the run, 2 major criminal trials, and one conviction after another had seemingly stripped away every visible reaction. But his story still wasn't over. Because after he finally walked out of prison, the world would witness its final chapter.
September 2015. After spending several consecutive years behind bars, Gottfrid Svartholm was finally released from a prison in Denmark. He no longer looked the same. His face had grown thinner. The defiant confidence that once defined him had been replaced by the visible exhaustion of years spent fighting legal battles. But his freedom was still incomplete. Outside the prison, Swedish police were already waiting for him. The moment he stepped outside, he was arrested once again. The reason? One remaining month of prison time still had to be served in Sweden. It was a legal formality connected to his earlier hacking convictions. Finally, December 2015. After nearly 3 years of continuous legal battles, arrests, extraditions, and prison sentences, Gottfrid Svartholm was finally a free man. Waiting outside the prison was his mother,
she said only one thing to the reporters. He just wants to sit in front of a keyboard again. A man who had spent the greatest part of his life in front of a computer screen. Gottfrid's story had become the complete journey of a hacker. Creation, success, escape, capture, conviction, and finally, freedom.
But what happened to the Pirate Bay? Surprisingly, it never truly disappeared. Even today, it still exists on the internet. Its influence may not be what it once was. Today, Netflix, Spotify, and countless streaming services have transformed the way people consume media. File sharing itself has changed dramatically. And yet, anyone searching for it can still find the Pirate Bay, or one of its countless proxy mirrors. The website whose founders were sent to prison, whose servers were seized again and again, whose domains were repeatedly taken offline. And yet, it was never completely destroyed. Why? Because the Pirate Bay taught the internet a lesson that governments and major corporations understood only much later. If a system has no single center, destroying it completely becomes almost impossible. That is why the Pirate Bay became far more than just a website. It became a symbol of the decentralized internet. But history also teaches us something else. Some people never learn from the mistakes of others. 2011, a cybersecurity executive named Aaron Barr claimed he was about to expose the real identities behind the world's most mysterious hacking collective, Anonymous. He was convinced that he had uncovered one of the internet's greatest secrets. He publicly announced that he would hand the names of anonymous leaders over to the FBI. He believed he had everything: the names, the evidence, and a complete plan. But he had absolutely no idea who he had challenged.